In the early 2000s, many considered Sony the world's largest and most influential electronics company. Its trademarks were its home entertainment devices, top-quality cameras, and several movies that took over the box office. However, in the last 20 years, loss after loss has seen Sony experience a decline that not many would have seen coming. Before 2006, Sony was the world's leading TV manufacturer, a title it held for several years. But now, Samsung has taken over for the last 17 years. One can argue that Sony did not just lose its leading position, it crumbled below an expected low. Sony is currently placed 5th, with 6% in the TV market behind Samsung, Vio, LG and TCL. Things went so bad for Sony that it decided to spin off their TV business after taking losses for 10 years. But it's not just the legacy arm of Sony business that has taken a hit. Sony failed in its attempt to enter the PC industry for years and ended up selling the business. Similarly, the same thing happened with the smartphone manufacturing efforts. Although they haven't quit, they've failed to break 1% of the global market shares for years. The only aspect of Sony that is still going strong, it's PlayStation. Everything else isn't quite working. So how did a brand, once loved, widely known, and patronized by many around the world, get to the point where it struggles to break into new markets, keep old markets, and constantly run at a loss? This is the story of Sony, a once iconic brand, and the crisis that brought it down. The story of Sony began in 1946, when it was established as Tokyo Chuchin Kogyo by Masaru Buku and Akio Morita. Starting as an electronics company, Sony was initially known for producing products like the transistor radio, TR-55, the portable audio player Walkman, the home videotape recorder CV-2000, and the compact disc player CDP-101, and entered into diverse business ventures. In 1988, it acquired CBS Records, and by the following year, it bought Columbia Pictures. It didn't stop there though. Sony eventually went on to release the new iconic video game console called PlayStation. Sony expanded its operation into the financial sector in its home country, Japan. Sony's start was actually at the end of the Second World War. During that time, Masaru Ibuka opened an electronics store in Shirokiya, a department store building in the Nihonbashi area of Tokyo. There, the company started its operation with 190,000 yens and only 8 employees. In May 1946, Akio Morita joined Ibuku to start a company known as Tokyo Chuchin Kogyo, which developed Japan's first ever tape recorder, Type G. At this point, Morita and Ibuka, the founders of Tokyo Chuchin Kogyo, present-day Sony, realized that in order for them to achieve success, they had to expand their business on the international front. To do that, they knew they needed more straightforward brand name. While weighing their options, they initially considered using their initials, TTK. However, the primary reason why they didn't go with that option because the railway company Tokyo Kyuku was already known as TTK. The company used the acronym Tatsuku in Japan, but when Morita visited the United States, he found that the Americans found it challenging to pronounce the name, so they considered another name, Tokyo Teletech. The hope of using the name came crashing when they found that an American company was already using Teletech as its brand name, so they decided to use Sony, which was chosen for the brand as a blend of 2 different words. The first was a Latin word called sonus, which is the source of sonic and sound. The second was Sony, a popular American slang term that was used during the 1950s in America to refer to young boys. During that time in Japan, Sony boys was a Japanese word that meant smart and presentable young men, which Morita and Ibuku considered themselves to be. And so, the name Sony has stayed with the company up to this day. According to Schiffer, Sony's TR-630 radio was the product that helped it crack open the US market and launched the new industry of consumer microelectronics. During the mid-1950s, teens in America had started purchasing portable transistor radios in huge numbers, helping to propel the fledgling industry from an estimated 100,000 units in 1955 to 5 million units by the end of 1968. From there on, Sony never looked back. It continued to break several records, establishing itself as one of the most iconic brands ever. However, despite its early success, the company faced huge struggles in the mid to late 2000s. Sony fall is an illustration of the fact that even iconic companies and brands can falter if they are slow in adapting to the changing times. The start of Sony's decline can be tracked back to 2001 when Apple Incorporation launched the iPod, a device that went on to change the music industry as we know it, ushering a new era of consumer electronics. When Apple introduced its iPod to the market, it not only secured the imagination of consumers, but also started a huge turning point in wired iPod technology, making it a significant competitor to Sony, which wasn't used to such. The success of Apple's iPod further showed the increasing struggles that Sony was facing in keeping up with the ever-changing consumer preferences and technological changes. While Sony had a long-standing history of pioneering products like the PlayStation and Walkman, it failed largely in capitalizing on new trends. It missed the chance to enter key markets like smartphones. Although it got into this, it never really got going for the company. The company's decision to focus mainly on hardware rather than software turned out to be a costly one, as its lack of adaptability to consumer demands meant it couldn't keep its place as the world's leading technology company, opening up places for the likes of Apple and Samsung. Its inability to change the company's product-based approach to an approach that puts the needs of its consumers first added to Sony's decline, resulting in several missed opportunities as its traditional consumer now preferred products tailored to their preferences. Similarly, Sony's weak strategy, which included a lack of clear vision, a confusing and crowded product line, and failure to produce game-changing innovations, also resulted in its further decline. Fast forward 4 years. In 2005, Sony still had not learned a valuable lesson from Apple's launch of the iPod, which took one of its major products, the Walkman. This time it was Samsung. On March 11, 2005, Samsung announced its launch of the world's largest LCD TV. At the time, an 82-inch TV was totally out of reach for an average person, but that wasn't the point, nor did it matter to Samsung. The goal wasn't to sell a bunch of them, or even further showcase technology development. It was designed for people to think that Samsung, as the leading brand in pushing technology forward, establishing a strong brand relationship with consumers, that Samsung was the brand for the future. The launch of the 82-inch LCD TV was just the first of many theatrics Samsung used. After that, it also launched 3D TVs, curved TVs, QLED, OLED and Mini LED and Nano LED. For most of these products, consumers had no clue what the terms meant. But to Samsung, what mattered was creating fancy new products that people would be interested in associating with. So it wasn't even a coincidence that the same thing happened in the digital camera market. Prior to the early 2000s, Kodak was untouchable, as it controlled over 80% of the entire market in the US and around half of the global market. That's without mentioning they were the world's 5th most valuable brand. Despite that fact, the company eventually made a mistake with its digital cameras, opening up a whole new way for competitors. Ideally, this would have been the perfect opportunity for Sony to enter into a new market and brand themselves as leaders in the face of digital cameras. Instead, they passed up the chance, and Canon eventually took on the image and became a leading player in the industry. It's worth noting that in all of this, despite Sony never taking the first initiative, they weren't really behind in any of the markets, be it cameras, MP3 players or TVs. What Sony did was launch similar products in parallel with the leading market brands. If by chance you asked anyone who has bought a Sony products, they'd only have one good thing to say. To this day, several experts believe that Sony products are often more reliable and of higher quality compared to the so-called market leaders. However, none of it matters because the fact remains that Sony was destroyed by its competitors when it came to market positioning and branding. It wasn't just in a single segment, it was across the board. This doesn't tell the full story of Sony's decline, as not all of it can be explained by strong competition. The fact that Sony's decline can be attributed to fault from the company itself. Going into the early 2000s, Sony was riding on a huge success off the back of it, largely dominating the 80s and 90s. This saw the company expand into almost any industry you could possibly think of, including a bank with an insurance division. One of the major reasons for Sony's initial success was its ability to produce reliable and affordable electronics for its consumer base. However, as the company began expanding into other sectors, it started losing its identity, and the constant requirement to closely manage the new ventures meant it couldn't focus on running and improving its main brand identity. It was a classic pitfall for the company with over 2,000 employees. If this wasn't enough proof of Sony's decline was caused by itself, then hiring a random outsider to manage the company was. During that time, it was quite common for big companies to hire some random person as their CEO, as we saw with Nokia. Sony took the same step, hiring Howard Stringer, a lifelong media executive to be the head of the United States operations. Howard, for all his experience in media, had zero experience when it came to running an electronics company. He also had no proper understanding of the fundamentals that made Sony a very successful company to begin with. In 2005, he was made the CEO and chairman of the entire company. Ideally, one would think for such a crucial role in the company, largely dominated by Japanese-speaking employees, the CEO should be someone capable of talking to the average employee in Japanese. With all the signs in place, it wasn't a surprise that Sony stock fell by 75% during Howard's time as CEO of the company. One of the notable things Sony got out of Howard's tenure was the roughly $1 billion he made for the company from investing in Spotify. Howard wasn't a great fit for Sony, but he wasn't bad either. The company would certainly have been better off focusing on its original idea of producing standard and reliable products, which is exactly what consumers need before transitioning to provide better experiences with its products. While Howard's still in charge, Sony was now facing the harsh reality of watching its sales and profit take a deep plunge, signaling the start of the Great Decline. 2009 was a year to forget for the company, as Sony reported that it made a staggering loss of $343 million before income taxes. In comparison with the previous year, it made an income of $655 million. Some of the several reasons for the downturn were due to the yen's appreciation, an exponential increase in restructuring charges, and $180.2 million blew away from deteriorating results at some of its equity affiliates, most notably Sony Ericsson Mobile Communications. As the year progressed, the financial decline worsened. The first quarter of 2009 saw an operating loss of $268 million, resulting in an unsettling $1 billion year-on-year decline. Despite the company's attempt to streamline its operations by reducing costs, the effect of the yen's appreciation, the faltering equity affiliates, and restructuring charges kept weighing down the company. The second quarter of 2009 wasn't any better. In fact, it brought more financial decline fueled by unstable sales and harsh foreign exchange rates, especially in the gaming industry, where Sony's PlayStation 3 was facing strong competition from Nintendo's Wii. Similarly, Sony's electronics division also suffered a huge operating loss, as the sales of its Bravia range of flat-panel TV declined. The company's financial decline continued, as it reached its peak, a $1 billion loss, marking the company's first ever net loss in over a decade. Howard's tenure saw further woes for Sony as its stock price declined, with the shares dropping by almost 42% in a year to $11.82 and shedding nearly 62% of its value over a 5-year period. The severe financial decline resulted in a leadership change. Sir Howard Stinger stepped from his role as CEO and was replaced by Kaz Hirai in 2012. Kaz's job was simple: to turn around Sony's struggling electronic business after taking over as CEO. Kaz Hirai planned to unify Sony's operation and focus mainly on the company's core areas, electronics, while also expanding into emerging markets. However, he faced a strong challenge, which included a collection of issues that had been building up before he was appointed, including the late adoption of emerging trends and technologies in the television industry, Ericsson's struggle in the mobile phone industry, and an industry-wide downturn that was affecting all major competitors. As Sony continued to suffer losses in the television business, there was an urgent need to cut its workforce by 100,000 employees by the end of 2013. It was the only way the company could continue operations at the time. In 2015, Sony announced a second mid-range plan, which had the theme Profit Generation and Investment for Growth. It emphasized the profitability of each business and defined return on equity as the most essential KPI. The plan classified all ventures within Sony's large business portfolio as a growth driver, an area focusing on volatility, or a stable profit generator aimed at determining the management direction for all areas and simplifying the path to improved capital turnover and profitability. Unfortunately, the plan didn't produce the expected results. In 2012, Michael Linton, the CEO of Sony Entertainment, resigned from his role due to the growing dissatisfaction of the parent company, Sony Corporation. The studio was experiencing several weak box office returns. It was further compounded by the massive cyber attack in 2014 that exposed several companies' internal documents. The flooding in Thailand and the Great East Japan earthquake also worsened Sony's financial decline. As Sony continued to struggle with its decline, more problems resulted that further ruined the brand's reputation. Its former CEO, Howard Stringer, was involved in a sexual harassment allegation while the company was hit with an $8 million fine in 2011 for a massive data breach that compromised sensitive information belonging to employees. The breach shocked the company to its core, leaving serious doubt about the company's trust and security. Howard's sexual harassment scandal tarnished Sony's image as once respected CEO found himself in the middle of sensitive issues that caused the masses to question his time at Sony and their stance on such accusations. Multiple women laid sexual allegations on Howard, accusing him of harassing them, with more coming out to share their stories. As the public clamped down on the issue and legal battles loomed, Sony, an iconic brand now a shadow of its old self, was forced to face the harsh reality of the vulnerable situation it now finds itself in. Perhaps if certain mistakes like hiring Howard Stringer or venturing into too many markets were not made, Sony might have been able to avoid this decline, but inevitably it hampered its growth. Some might argue that Sony eventually figuring out a winning strategy that saw it coming back from its decline, at least to an extent. However, it wasn't what truly happened. What Sony basically did was get their operations back together and attempt to address a core issue. In 2012, Sony put one of its veterans in charge, and he successfully salvaged what was left of Sony, shutting down all unprofitable sectors and reducing the workforce from 170,000 to a little over 100. He also spun off major sectors to their own businesses, separating out the businesses that could continue operations and making them independent of the already full parent company. He cut everything else off, and this has allowed Sony to recover profits in much of its stock losses. However, despite this, Sony still remains a shadow of itself. Its biggest source of revenue after PlayStation 5 is not even electronics division, but its background financial services division. So imagine if Sony had never got it right with its gaming division. The company's existence would have been well and truly over. It wouldn't have survived the great decline. Although it did, it came to a huge price that Sony company most people knew while growing up is now merely one for the history books. If you enjoyed watching this video, do leave a like and subscribe to this channel for more interesting stories and hidden secrets.